Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I thought I would share some more book reviews of some of the books that I have enjoyed recently. I recently booked a holiday to Japan for next year, which is really exciting, so I thought it was a good opportunity to share some of the Japanese or Asian themed or influenced books by some Asian authors or British authors writing about Asia. So I've got a few here, just a few. So the first one is one that I've read recently, and this is Sweet Bean Paste by Jurian Sekogawa, and I'm sorry that I will be pronouncing names probably really wrong, but I'm afraid I'm not familiar with Japanese pronunciations that well. This book was written in 2013 in Japanese and then first published in 2017 in English, and it was translated by Alison Watts. It's a sweet and sad story of two people, both who have troubled pasts, but who are brought together or come together to make sweet bean paste in the title of the book. The sweet bean paste, which is made out of adzuki beans, I think, and it goes in the dorayaki pancakes, which are apparently a very popular confectionery dessert in Japan. Toku, who is one of the characters, is a lady in maybe her 70s, and she has had her life and her identity really stolen from her because of a terrible illness that she suffered when she was a child, and it really educated me, I suppose, on Japan's historic attitude towards illness and disability, which is probably shared in many other countries or has been shared in many other countries, but it was something that I wasn't fully aware of, so I appreciated that. I also thought there was some nice details and some nice touches on the changing weather in Japan. So you have the cherry blossom infused spring, the hot and humid summer, and then the cooler autumn months. So that was one that I read recently that I enjoyed. The descriptions of the Japanese seasonal changes are also featured in my next book, which is the Nakano Thrift Shop, which again I have trouble pronouncing, and this is by Hiromi Kawakami. This was also translated from the original Japanese by Alison Markin Powell. It was written, according to my notes, I'm just checking, in 2005 in Japanese and then translated in English in 2016. So it's another fairly recent book, or certainly fairly recent in English. Our protagonist, Hitomi, works in the eponymous thrift shop, where she works with the taciturn and slightly awkward Takeo, who she then becomes somewhat involved with. The eponymous owner of the thrift shop, Nakano, Mr. Nakano, has an unpredictable and unconventional conversation style where he'll just kind of come out with random sentences and she has to piece together what he's trying to say. And in fact, much of the book is just her trying to figure out what Takeo and Nakano are actually trying to say. And yet at the same time, in a book where people seem to be struggling to communicate, there are some really blunt sexual references where people will talk quite explicitly about their sex lives in a way that kind of reminded me of Murakami's Norwegian Wood, just in that regard, just in the kind of description of sex and sexual references. I don't think it was offensive, it just sort of jarred with me a little bit, especially when the rest of the book is about people not really being able to say what they're actually feeling or thinking, to say something that we in the West consider to be quite a private matter, just so outright seemed a little bit odd. But I don't know whether that is just these authors, I don't know whether that is something that's true of Japanese people in the way they talk about sex. I don't know whether it's just the way it's been translated, but that's just what stood out to me in this book. And then for a slightly different perspective on Japan, there is A Pale View of the Hills by Ishiguro, who's one of my favourite authors and recently won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe, for literature. My favourite of his books, and potentially his most well-known, is Never Let Me Go. Sorry, this copy's a bit battered. This was made into a film a few years ago, and this Never Let Me Go is amazing. It's emotional, it's traumatizing, it's beautiful, it ruins every other book for you. It's brilliant, I highly recommend it. But just to stick with our Japanese theme, I thought I would pick one of his books that I read more recently, which is set mostly in Japan. It's set post-war Japan. It's actually, our protagonist now lives in rural England, and she's very comfortable there, but she does go back and think about her life in Japan before she moved to England. Set in post-war Japan, which I think must have been a really interesting but also really upsetting and difficult time. A lot of people have lost people, so there's lots of characters who have lost people in the Second World War and the bombings of Japan. So there's many characters who lost their husbands or their sons, you know, their fiancés, their relatives, which has obviously then completely changed the future of their lives. There's also big political, economic and social changes which are captured in the book. So young people now not continuing to live with their parents after they get married, but now wanting to move into modern apartment blocks, which is where our protagonists live. The main story really centres around Etsuko, the protagonist, our main character, and her remembering a friendship she had with an unconventional woman, Sachiko, who arrives with her daughter. This is a time when Etsuko was younger, she was recently married and she was pregnant, so she was thinking about motherhood and her impending child, and then looking at this other woman and her very unconventional approach to raising her child. And there are hints that there may be something much, much darker going on under the surface. But yeah, it's quite a short book, it's worth a read. David Mitchell is one of my favourite authors. I've read quite a few books by him. His most famous work is probably Cloud Atlas, and this is my really battered copy of Cloud Atlas. This became a film, I think in 2012, so the book is famous, the film is famous. But I actually much prefer The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet. It's probably more like Jacob. He's Dutch. I honestly don't know how you pronounce Dutch names or Japanese names or any names. But I really liked this book. I think it's brilliant. I think it's his best work. I think it took him about 4 years to write because of the intensity of the research of the historical details. David Mitchell lived in Japan for a few years, I think, when he was teaching English, and he also married a Japanese woman, and so he does have a connection to the country, and then he also spent a lot of time researching the details. So the book is set in the very late 18th century and then into the early 19th century. Jacob, or however you pronounce his name, works for the Dutch East Indies Company, and he's a clerk, and he goes to Nagasaki with the intention of being there for maybe a year, doing some work to try and sort out some mundane irregularities in their bookkeeping, then returning back and marrying the woman that he loves, having proved himself to her father that he is kind of worthwhile and you know, can hold down a job for a bit. He ends up getting pulled into a corruption scandal, which kind of, you know, creates chaos in his plans. That then draws him into a much wider, really creepy plot with religious cults, and it does take you off into a bonkers, dark direction. It really does go off in a weird way, but the strength of Mitchell's writing is such that you willingly go with him, and I really enjoyed this book and I really appreciated it. A lot of Mitchell's books jump around different characters and different timelines and different locations within the same book. So Cloud Atlas is an example of that. Each chapter is from a different perspective, a different character's perspective. In Thousand Autumns, it does that a little bit, but much less. So the first half of the book is from Jacob's perspective, and then approximately the second half of the book is the perspective of a Japanese clerk translator who he's been working with, which gives you a different look at what's happening, and it takes the story in a different direction, which I really appreciated. I liked having time with the characters to get to know them, but also it's nice to get the two different perspectives. So I thought that worked really well. This is the book of his that I recommend to people, because I do really enjoy it, and because everyone ends up getting Cloud Atlas, but I do actually think this is better. So moving away from Japan, we have this book of short stories. It's called The Refugees. It's by an author called Viet Thanh Nguyen, which I hope, again, I'm pronouncing that right. He also has won a Pulitzer Prize for Fiction back in 2016. and this book is from 2017. He is a Vietnamese American author, and this book is mainly about, it's all about refugees from Vietnam, mainly going to America. These short stories, although they're short, he has the ability to give you a glimpse into people's lives and really capture their humanity and the emotions of the situation that they're going through. And there are some really sweet stories, there are some really upsetting stories. So one woman is haunted by the ghost of her brother who died many years ago when he was a young teenager, saving her life from pirates who were going to try and take her away when the family was fleeing and trying to escape the country. Another woman has very vivid memories of their leaving Vietnam and trying to escape on a very rickety, dangerous boat. But she's also dealing with her husband, who now is suffering from the early stages of dementia or Alzheimer's, who seems to be mixing her up with another woman, and she's always having to deal with the fact that she now has to put her retirement plans on hold to really look after and care for him full time, but also dealing with the fact that she may not have been the love of his life. Maybe that was another woman that he's now mixing her up with. So it's a lot of bittersweet stories. Again, worth the read, but as always with short stories, I always wish they went on longer. I always like the idea of a short story because it's short, but then I always think like, oh, I wish I could continue reading and find out what happens to the characters. But yeah, he's an interesting author, so I recommend this. I read The Vegetarian by Han Kang, a Korean author, and it is a weird book. I really liked it, but it goes off into a weird direction at the end that I didn't expect it to go in. But her second book, Human Acts, which was written first in Korean in 2014 and then came out in English in 2016, translated by Deborah Smith, is an incredibly poignant and at times upsetting book. It describes real events that happened in South Korea, where a student uprising was brutally put down, stopped, that in the result that many students and young people were killed. So the story follows one young boy, a young teenager, who goes to fight with the students and is killed, and each chapter follows a different person that is affected, including the boy himself. So there is a chapter with his ghost or his spirit or his soul, however we want to look at that, trying to find his body because there's just a pile of bodies of the children that have been killed. There's a chapter with his mother, there's a chapter with his grown-up siblings. It's quite upsetting, but it's really touching, and it's really interesting, and again you learn something about the history of a country that perhaps you didn't know anything about before. So Human Acts by Han Kang. Okay, so those were some of my favourite books from recent times, particularly ones with an Asian theme to them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any recommendations or suggestions of books that I might like, please leave them in the comments below. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe.